Should you upgrade to the LUMIX S1ii from the LUMIX S5iiX? Or if you're looking to make a purchase decision between these two cameras, which camera is going to be best for you? Well, in this video, I'm going to be deep diving and comparing these two cameras. So without further ado, let's dive in. First thing that we need to touch point is going to be the price point of these cameras. The LUMIX S1ii is going to be coming in at $3,200 brand new. Meanwhile, the LUMIX S5iiX brand new or at launch price is at $2,200. So $1,000 less than the LUMIX S1ii. Currently though in the market, you can get the LUMIX S5iiX for $1,900 brand new, and it is also on the used market around $1,500 to $1,600 depending where you're looking. In terms of the physical build between these cameras, they're very similar and identical in a lot of ways, but there's some major key differences between the two bodies. You have a 24.2 megapixel sensor on the S5iiX and a 24.1 megapixel sensor on the S1ii. On the S1ii, you also do get access to that front record button. You do also have that tilt-free screen, a dedicated photo, video, and slow and quick switch, locking buttons to switch between your different photo bursts and your shooting modes, and a dedicated lock switch to lock any of your dials or switches or buttons on the back of your camera. The LUMIX S1ii does have a closed shutter. The grip on the S1ii is a slightly deeper grip than the S5iiX, but they both feel very premium in your hands. And the last major difference, on the S5iiX, you do have 2 SD card slots. Meanwhile, on the S1ii, you have 1 SD card and 1 CF Express Type B card, which dives into the video specs between these cameras. So for video specs, let's start off with the S5iiX. Now, I have used the S5iiX for the last 2 years now as my professional workhorse camera, shooting TV campaigns, social media campaigns, and different things like that. So I have put this camera through the ringer of really pin this camera to the test. Some highlight video features, because I'm not going to dive into all of them because there's a lot. You do have 6K open gate up to 30 frames a second. You have 1080 120 frames a second. You have 4K up to 60 frames a second, but there is an APS-C or 1.5x crop on your image. And then you also do have 3.8K open gate light or MP4 light, which currently the S1ii still does not have that feature. And the last feature is ProRes internally, mostly because ProRes, you can record some of the HD options to an SD card, but most of it you're probably going to be using a SSD recording externally outside of the camera. Shifting gears a little bit to the S1ii, I have been using this as my primary workhorse camera for the last 2 to 3 months, but here's some of the highlight features. Obviously, you have 6K open gate up to 30 frames a second. The next setting that I really like is going to be 5.1K, which is downsampled 48 and 60 frames a second in open gate. And those are primarily 6K open gate and 5.1K open gate is primarily the main things I'm shooting and using this camera for, to use the entire sensor width and height, and there's no crop modes whatsoever in 4K 60 or anything like that. You do have Cine 4K up to 96 frames a second with no crop. Obviously, again, 4K 48 and 60 frames a second with no crop. Then you do have 4K 120 frames a second, and then 1080 240 frames a second, but there is going to be about a 1.17x crop on your image. So it's not an APS-C crop, but there's a slight crop on 4K 120 frames a second and 1080 240 frames a second. Then lastly, similar to the S5iiX, you do have ProRes, but you also get ProRes RAW internally in this camera. Both these cameras can record RAW externally, either ProRes RAW or Blackmagic RAW, depending on your taste or what editing software you're using at the end of the day. Moving on, let's talk about video assist tools. Both the LUMIX S5iiX and the S1ii have a plethora of video tools and assist features on both these cameras. Both support proxy recording, so being able to record proxies. You have your camera to cloud integration via frame.io. You have real-time LUT and the LUMIX Lab app supports, and then the rest of the LUMIX magic that comes with these cameras, like shutter angle, electronic stabilization, multiple frame markers, histograms, waveform, vector scopes. Really, the list kind of goes on and on. And then a couple extra tools that the LUMIX S1ii does have is going to be things like false color, being able to preview false colors directly in your camera is a huge win. You also have currently LUMIX Flow app support is on the S1 models. I would imagine that does eventually come to the S5iiX. It just probably takes a little bit of time and firmware update like that. And then in terms of electronic stabilization, even though both these do have standard and high electronic stabilization, the S1 series cameras did introduce cropless stabilization, which takes LUMIX lenses and adds electronic stabilization without cropping into your image. Nextly, let's talk about the audio. With the S1 II via the XLR2, you do get 32-bit flow audio internally. Obviously, you still need to buy an XLR2 and have it on top of this adapter. And the XLR2 does work on the S5iiX as well, but you're only going to be recording 24-bit instead of 32-bit flow audio internally on your MOV file. In terms of color science, both of these shoot in Vlog. I would say the S1 II produces a little bit more of a softer, natural, warmer image overall. Meanwhile, the S5iiX is a little bit more digitally sharp. So depending on your taste or needs, I would say both are really, really pleasing at the end of the day. Granted, my personal preference in terms of color science and the image by itself is going to be the S1 II because I do like those softer, warmer tones. Granted, the S5iiX still looks really, really good for what that camera's price point is able to offer. In terms of more color science, the S1 II, you are able to get a paid upgrade for $200 to get ARRI Log C3, and I have an entire video talking about ARRI Log with LUMIX cameras. You can check out that video right there. Shifting gears slightly, let's talk about image quality and dynamic range. On the S5iiX, the image that it produces is still extremely pleasing. In terms of dynamic range, it does have 12 stops of dynamic range according to LUMIX, and the S1 II has 14 stops of dynamic range, but there is a boost mode to turn on dynamic range boost, which jumps your ISO to 1000 but gets you 15 stops of dynamic range. Now, I will say the S1 II out of all LUMIX cameras, and I've been shooting on LUMIX since 2016, the S1 II has the best dynamic range by far that I have seen from any LUMIX camera. And recently, I believe that CineD, and I'll leave the article down below, did a whole test showing off how the S1 II with the dynamic range boost mode was able to kind of be on par with an ARRI Alexa cameras. Now, going in more into the field tests, let's do autofocus. There's not really much to say here. Both of these autofocuses perform extremely well in similar conditions. Both have very, very high quality performance. The S1 II does have a couple extra modes in terms of autofocus. That mostly just includes the urban sports mode, but I would imagine the S5iiX does get that eventually via a firmware update. The next field test that I did pit both these cameras is going to be the stabilization or an IBIS test. Now, both these cameras do have 5 axis of in-body image stabilization or IBIS, but the S5iiX has 6.5 stops of stabilization. Meanwhile, the S1 II has 8 stops of stabilization. What does that mean? I don't know. It just means that S1 II should theoretically be more stable. Lastly is going to be the low light performance. Now, in Vlog, both of these have a dual native ISO when you are not using any dynamic range boost mode, especially on the S1 II. Both have a dual native ISO at 640, and then on the high base, it's slightly different. On the high base on the S1 II, your high base and second base ISO is going to be 5000. Meanwhile, on the S5iiX, it's going to be 4000. With all that said, both these cameras give amazing results in low light, and you really can't go wrong with either one. The S5iiX, I've shot a ton of things in low light and have been extremely impressed with the low light performance. So that's enough said. And finally, reliability. This obviously, I think with what's currently been going on in the whole LUMIX ecosystem with overheating on the S1 models and different things like that, well, I had to do overheating tests and I had to show the reliability between both these cameras, because if you are going on to shoots, you want to have your gear and you want to be able to fully trust it. So here's a couple of my interesting results with both these cameras. So here's the overheating test directly in the sun, pitting these cameras to the limit. So on both these cameras, I was recording in 6K open gate 24 frames a second, and I was only recording onto one SD card. It was around 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 23 Celsius. The only two things that were slightly different between these tests on these cameras, on the S1 II, I was using Auto 1 for the fan speeds and high thermal management. Meanwhile, on the S5iiX, I was using Auto 2 and standard thermal management on this camera. The results were kind of shocking, TBH. The S1 II, the overheating symbol did pop up around 12 minutes on this camera, and the entire camera shut down directly in the sun around 15 minutes. Meanwhile, on the S5iiX, well, the symbol did not pop up and the camera didn't overheat. The camera ended up dying around probably, I think, like an hour and 12 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, give or take. In terms of reliability, in an outside scenario, if you're a wedding filmmaker or you're in somewhere that you just need to put a camera on a tripod, in whatever condition it is, it will perform. Well, the S5iiX then is the clear answer in that regards. Now, when I took the S1 II and brought it inside to do my studio tests, well, that's where the results were kind of shocking, if I'm being 100% honest. I did the exact same settings on the S1 II that I did prior. The only difference was I wasn't outside in the direct sun and I was in a studio, but the temperature changed. I wasn't in 75 degrees and 23 Celsius, which is pretty nice weather if I'm being honest to myself. I was in a 90 degree or 33 Celsius studio. It was baking hot, I was sweating, and I had these settings set to Auto 1 and high thermal management, the exact same. Now, the kicker is the S1 II ended up dying again an hour and like 12-ish minutes. I'm not 100% sure. I don't really remember exactly. But the S1 II ended up dying with no overheating symbol, but it was in a hotter environment. So what that really tells me is it really due to heat or is it due to UV rays and being in the sunlight? The answer is, I think it's a little bit of both. Having this being cooked in the sun, dealing with temperature, but then dealing with the UV rays on this camera probably will affect its performance by an extreme amount. With that said though, in a studio that was much hotter, at 15 degrees hotter than being outside, so I think with all of that to be said, my actual real world experience using this on jobs, using this in a podcast scenario where I was in a garage that was 85 degrees and I was rolling on this camera or filming outside many times or doing sport commercials or doing this on real productions and real shoots and even on a construction site in the sun for 4 hours, I have never actually experienced overheating on the LUMIX S1 II in real world examples and scenarios on how I personally use the camera. Granted, I am obviously not saying that it wouldn't happen or there isn't a chance for happening, but personally speaking, I've never experienced the S1 II overheating on me in my actual workflow with clients before. Granted, I'm not just leaving this on sticks or on a tripod in the direct sun for 30 minutes to an hour like some wedding filmmakers, and I'm not recording in 4K 60 longer than 2 minutes at a take. With all that said, if you are going to be buying your first LUMIX camera, should you get the S5iiX or the S1 II? In all honesty, I'm gonna have to say get the S5iiX. It's just $1,000+ less dollars. You can put that money towards lights, you could put that money towards audio, you could put that money towards lenses and different things like that. The S5iiX is definitely the bane for your buck. You're getting so much value, you're getting a reliable camera, and it's definitely such a great first camera. Nextly, should you upgrade from the S5iiX to the S1 II? Well, before I answer that question, my question for you guys is, what from the S5iiX is really holding you back in terms of your personal professional workflow? I've used the S5iiX for commercial spots, for TV spots, for social media campaigns, and really the list goes on and on. This camera can really do most, and if not all, the shoots that I really need it to do. Yes, there's a lot more features that the S1 II has, but is it more of a want or a necessarily a need? For myself personally speaking, having the open gate 60 frames a second definitely has been a huge win, but if you're waiting for something that could be bigger than this or something like that along those lines, well, that's going to be the question you need to ask yourself. Does the S5iiX, is it holding you back? Or do you just want to get the new shiny tool, which is a cool shiny tool, I will admit. Then lastly, if you're switching to LUMIX from Sony or some other camera brand and you're considering getting something like an FX3 or the LUMIX S1ii, truthfully answering that question would be just a biased answer for me, because I'm going to say the LUMIX S1ii if you're switching from a different camera brand and you're thinking about getting something like an FX3 competitor. This definitely checks a lot of boxes. Overall, both these cameras are extremely capable, but I would love to hear your guys' opinions in the comments down below. Which one would you choose? The LUMIX S5iiX because of the reliability and just knowing that this ain't gonna be overheating, or the LUMIX S1ii because it's still a powerhouse of a camera and still is able to perform extremely well in a lot of scenarios and conditions. Love to hear your guys' comments down below. If you are interested in seeing the video on the LUMIX S5iiX versus the LUMIX S1ii, well, you can check out that video right there. YouTube recommends more like this video right here. Until next one, guys, peace.